I think getting on a scale often for somebody who struggles with disordered eating is a trap. So many people who are chronic dieters are addicted to the number on the scale.
Some sort of stress or some sort of trigger happens, and maybe they're in the kitchen and they're kind of eating past fullness, feeling out of control. What do you feel like is actually happening in that moment?
75% of emotional eaters are nighttime eaters, meaning that's when they really lose control.
All right, Tricia Nelson, so happy to have you. Welcome to the Broads podcast.
Thanks for having me. Really happy to be here.
Of course, I always love to start with some rapid fire questions to really just let's get straight into it. So, what do you feel like is the biggest misconception about emotional eating that keeps women stuck?
I think I think people think it's like eating Ben and Jerry's when somebody breaks up with you or something like that, which certainly that is emotional eating. But it's a lot of other things. You don't have to be overweight to be an emotional eater. You don't have to be a binger, like a binge eater to be an emotional eater. And so those are some misconceptions. And I think what's also true too is you don't even have to overeat to be an emotional eater. So you can be an undereater or a big restrictor. And it's like, if you're trying to control it, we don't try to control things that aren't out of control or on the verge of being out of control. So I think we have to notice that even if it's under eating, it can be emotionally driven, or we're some form of eating disorder, that's not binge eating or overeating. It's still emotionally driven. For me, it still belongs under the umbrella of emotional eating.
So, what's one mistake you see women make just over and over again when they try to stop binge eating?
So one mistake is that they try to fast. They do intermittent fasting as it's not really as a longevity hack, but more or a health hack, but more to hack their compulsion to eat. So they're like, oh, if the longer I stay out of the kitchen, the more likely I am to be safe around food. But that's not a winning strategy. Like, this is a little precarious,
Yeah.
because you have to be in the kitchen sometimes. And so it's not about whoa, stay out of the kitchen. Like, I'm about helping people actually heal that compulsion where they can be neutral around food and they can walk into the kitchen and not have everything call to them where they can't resist. So, we have to really heal so that it's not all about white knuckling through, not eating, because that's just not peaceful.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
really want people to have peace.
So, hot take, is willpower real or is it BS?
Well, people can look at their own track record to see how willpower works. We have the most, right? The most ability to resist in the morning, and then willpower, dwindles as you go throughout the day. That's why nighttime eating is such a thing for emotional eaters. But also, if somebody is high on the emotional eating spectrum, and I can get into what that spectrum is about and how to take, an evaluation to determine where you're on the spectrum, that the higher people are on the spectrum, the less likely they will have willpower, especially around sugar and processed carbs, because they are highly addictive. And then you add the emotional eater personality to it. It's so hard to apply willpower, and people beat themselves up when they can't, which is so sad because the kind of people I work with, they can't. And the sooner we accept it and we apply other tools that will help us make sane and sound choices without trying to flex our muscles around food, the better.
Yes. And I know these are rapid fire, so we can go a lot deeper in them, but
Great.
true or false, if you just eat clean, emotional eating goes away on its own.
Well, that would be nice if you could not emotionally eat. Like, if I could have eaten clean, I would have eaten clean. So, people say to emotional eaters, oh, just eat less and exercise more. Like, we hadn't thought of that, right? Like, duh, it's like we can't. We can't. We have every good intention and can't follow through on what we know. I mean, I work with people who are health coaches or other kinds of, coaches in the health space, and, they themselves sometimes can't, right? They succumb to a late night binge. And so it's not about willpower. It's not about just eat clean. Of course, we all would if we could,
Yeah.
but sometimes we need support.
So what's one wellness trend around food that makes you want to go crazy and scream? I don't know if you are the
Um,
type of person that would go crazy, Tricia, but
well, less and less these days, but sure, I get my panties in a twist about things sometimes. And
yeah.
I think getting on a scale often for somebody who struggles with disordered eating is a trap. The scale, we give the scale the power to make us feel good when we get on and it gives us a number we like. But then we have, if you're an emotional eater, you have little mechanism in your mind that's like, oh, now I can eat more, or now I can cheat because the scale said something I like. So we also give the scale the power to make us feel bad, because when it tells us something we don't like, that little mechanism in our mind is like, what's the point? Like, why bother going to the gym? Why bother doing the strength training? It's not paying off, and then screw it, right? So either way, it leads to self-sabotage. That's not to say you can't weigh yourself. It's just, so many people who are chronic dieters are addicted to the number on the scale. And they're literally saying, they're bowing before the scale. Dear scale, tell me how I'm going to feel today. And that is not freedom.
Oh, let's dive deeper into the scale talk. So, if you are someone that is on the scale or wants to weigh themselves all the time, what would you say to them to kind of slowly transition away from that?
Yeah, I would say just start limiting it like once a week, and down to once a month. And I don't know how you feel about that, but again, this is the caveat is this is people who get really messed up in their head about food and weight. I went to have my physical literally last week, and I always get on the scale backwards so I don't face the scale.
Mhm.
And she noticed that, and she said, "Well, I noticed you, didn't want to see your weight. We actually have a thing called blind weight now. So on my records, it's not even going to say my weight where it's visible to me." And I'm 37 years into my healing journey. I've been doing this my entire adult life,
Mhm.
and I'm telling you, it can mess me up to see the number. It's like, honestly, it's just none of my business. I don't own a scale. And I know that's scary for some people. Notice that if you're freaking out or getting a little sweaty right now, like the idea of not having anything, right? And if it's making you freak out, that's something to notice. That's when we're pretty hooked on something. And the scale is a big deal for a lot of people who are emotional eaters or food addicts even. And we have given our power away to that scale. And it doesn't even make a difference. Like the scale often doesn't make the scale go down when you measure, when you see a number. It's not like it like snaps you into action. It can send you spiraling into hell. Like, oh my God, I thought I was doing better than I am, or I thought it was paying off to go do those exercises, or, what's the point? And so that's just really important that, we don't want to give our power away that way. I know when my clothes feel a little snugger, and again, once a week or once a month is what I would say, just to keep you on track. But the obsession with the number and that being owned by the scale, again, I'm all about being at peace, peace not only physically, but mentally and emotionally as well, and spiritually. And so it's really important that we take a look at where we're really using those things to actually hurt us, and the same is with the exercise. Like I recommend gentle exercise to people, like walking, because when you're on your healing journey from disordered eating, which emotional eating is, binge eating, food addiction, when you're on a healing journey, you have to have a new relationship with exercise, where exercise is self-care, not compensation for overeating, right? Like we've used exercise to beat ourselves up or beat ourselves into submission or our bodies into submission. And that's just not the right relationship to have with exercise or with our bodies. And so I say, let's make it gentle. Let's make it something you can do, on a regular basis. You can be consistent with, you don't dread doing, do something that's fun, and there's exercise packed in, but you feel like you're just doing something fun.
Yeah. How do you know if you're an emotional eater?
So, there's a lot of telltale signs. I'll give you some of them. One is that you're obsessed with food. Like you think about food 24/7. You plan the next thing you're going to eat. You think all day about that yummy thing you're going to get on your way home from work, because you've had such a hard day. You use food as a reward or sweets as a reward. You have a dysfunctional relationship with your body where you hate your body, or there's body parts you condemn, like I'm so fat or my butt is so big. It's just a lot of harshness towards your body. And also being out of control with food. And the quiz I mentioned earlier is a good way to determine if you're an emotional eater or even addicted to food. It's a quiz on my website, which is healyourhunger.com. It's free. It takes like 3 minutes to take the quiz, but it will give you a personalized score. And the score is based on two things. The first is the level of control that you have. Like, can you scale back? When you realize your pants are tight, can you make some modifications and get back to the way they fit, the way you like? Or like, let's say you go on a cruise and you've prepaid, like it's all you can eat thing, and you go to town. That's typical, right? Everybody's like, I'm on vacation. So are you eating the cheese and crackers and the desserts or drinking the wine? That's not a sin. It's fine. But if you come home and your pants are too tight, you've gained 5 pounds, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to cut out sugar and I'm going to do, extra exercise. I'm going to jog extra, whatever, go to the gym more. And then before you know it, those 5 pounds are off. That is somebody with a good amount of control and also very few consequences. So the two determiners of what your score will be on the emotional eating quiz are control and consequences. So they didn't pay a high price in consequences, and they had control to course correct. Whereas somebody who's like me might have gone on that cruise, former me, eaten everything because it was free. Like if it's free, you got to eat it. Like that's our big excuse. Like, well, I paid for it. So never mind how I feel. But so
Yeah.
you come home, you have that extra 5 pounds, but you're like emotionally triggered by that. And you're like, God, I was doing so good before the cruise. Of course, you're trying to lose weight so you can look good in your bathing suit. But then you're triggered by that. And you also can't course correct. You just keep looking for more sugar because you allowed yourself to eat a dessert, every meal. And so before you know it, the 5 pounds becomes 10 pounds, and you can't get back on track the way you were, pre-cruise when you're working towards that goal. And so it affects your mood. You feel disgusting. You're wearing, black stretchy yoga pants or sweatpants. You don't want to be seen. You're like, oh, I've let myself go. So that's the kind of emotional relationship with food and with our bodies that is an indicator of somebody who's got more going on. Like they're an emotional eater, if not food addicted, especially if your health is impacted. Like your doctor said you're pre-diabetic and you have not cut sugar out of your diet because you're too emotionally addicted to it and physically addicted. So that's somebody who has very little control, and the consequences are starting to mount.
Yeah. Okay. So I like what you said earlier about, a lot of this stuff happens at night. So let's say like a woman feels very disciplined during the day, and then some sort of stress or some sort of trigger happens, and maybe they're in the kitchen and they're kind of eating past fullness, feeling out of control. What do you feel like is actually happening in that moment for them to get?
So, yeah, so there's a lot of reasons for nighttime eating. 75% of emotional eaters are nighttime eaters, meaning that's when they really lose control. Part of it's that we were distracted throughout the day. Like we were busy, we were distracted. We didn't like no like we had no time to eat, right? We had no time to eat, which in and of itself is a setup. If you're skipping meals, you're setting yourself up for nighttime eating. Okay, you need to eat a good breakfast and a good lunch so that at night you're not starving. Like your body's gonna say, screw you. Like we're getting what we missed, and so that's important. Even if you do 12 hours between your dinner and your breakfast, for a little intermittent fasting, it's important that you feed yourself, and emotional eaters are often starving because they're not feeding themselves properly, or they're just grazing throughout the day and they're not eating real meals. We kind of suck at taking good care of ourselves. And I tell my clients, like, how would you feed your sweet baby daughter, your little one? Would you be like, girl, we're going to go 16 hours without eating so we can shave off some pounds? No, you'd make sure she gets 3 meals, very healthy, nutritious, full of vitamins, right? And good fiber and good fats and everything like that. So we have to treat ourselves the way we would treat our sweet little one. And that's not easy to do if you have a history of dieting and crazy machinations with food. So that's one thing, right? The skipping meals, it's a setup. That's why a lot of times people eat at night, or they aren't eating proper meals. They're just snacking. It never pays off to skip meals. If you're an emotional eater, in the back of your mind, you're like, ooh, I missed lunch because of the team meeting. So I'm going to really, shave off some pounds. Like it's gonna help me lose weight. It never does. We always overcompensate later because we're too hungry. So that's one thing. Also, when we are so busy throughout the day, and overeaters, by the way, are overdoers. So we're really masters at packing our schedule. We stuff our schedule like we stuff ourselves. No time for self-care, no time to breathe. And so what that does is it leads to overeating because we've also stuffed our emotions with busy. We have no connection to what's going on inside of us. And so it's really important that we take a look at that, and that we start, really having some space in our day for just breathing, for resting, for sitting on the couch and just, watching a funny, goofy cat video or dance. I like dance videos, and it's okay to do that. Take a little break. Instead of just the go, go, go. That overdoing is a trap. But anyway, at night, we don't even know what happened. We don't know what emotions we stuffed down, but it hits us like a tidal wave. And it doesn't hit us like, oh, wow, I packed on a lot of emotions at, work today because I was so busy. No, it comes up as, I want chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
Or I wonder if there's any ice cream left in the fridge, right? So it comes as a craving. My feeling is most cravings are emotional. People talk about food noise, which is a great way to put it. All those food thoughts, most of the time it's because of the emotions we're not addressing. And we are just obsessed with food because food takes us out of our reality. It's a painkiller. I'm going to give you something called the PEP test, okay? This
Okay.
is the 3 primary emotional, we probably will go there, so I'm just going there now. So
Okay.
the 3 primary emotions that drive emotional eating, I have in the form of an acronym PEP, PEP. The
Okay.
first P stands for painkiller, which is why I brought this up, is that, our busy and our eating and our food thoughts, any one of them, you don't have to be eating for this to happen. Our obsession with food, our obsession with our tummies and our butts, this kills pain. It takes us out of our present moment. And there might be pain in our present moment. It might be a dysregulated kid, right, who just really saps our energy. It might be a mother with Alzheimer's. It might be a change of jobs. It might be a loss of job. It may be a bill we didn't expect. There's all kinds of pain, right? There's no shortage. Turn on the news. There's no shortage of things that make us feel overwhelmed and just hurt. We hurt, and we don't think of it that way because we're out of touch. But this is where we reach for food. Food's a painkiller. It is softening the edges of life. Whereas The E in PEP stands for escape. And as overeaters, we tend to be overthinkers. Okay. So we think the hell out of everything. What did she mean by that? Why didn't I get the invitation? Why haven't I heard back from that firm? Whatever it is. And we're running ourselves ragged with scary thoughts. We're not thinking, oh, let's think about all the good things that can happen today. No, we're thinking all the bad things that can happen today. I call it awfulizing, and so we're trying to escape our own brains, our negative brains, when we sit down on the couch late at night in front of our bingeable TV show and we're just eating unconsciously. We just want to escape what goes on between our ears. And the last P in PEP stands for punishment, which is an acronym. I'm sorry, not an acronym. PEP is an acronym. P stands for punishment, which is counterintuitive because we think of food as a reward, and food, while feels rewarding going down, if you overeat and then you feel like crap, that's not feeling like a reward. That's more of a punishment. Your pants don't fit, you're bloated, you're inflamed. So whatever health issues you have are exacerbated, and you don't want to go out with girls, your girlfriends the next day. That's hardly a reward. It's more of a punishment. But we think reward, because of course, in the moment it is, oh, I'm going to reward myself. We always say that. But then we go too far, and then we've shot, overshot the mark, and we feel like crap. That's a punishment. So PEP, I bring that up, Tara, because PEP is a nice way for people to start checking in with themselves when they're like, no, I just want chocolate. It's just a craving for chocolate. They can start doing a little check-in, and use PEP as a check-in. Is there something going on that's hard for me? Is there, something that I'm ruminating over and over? Or am I feeling bad about something and I need to address it or pick up the phone and talk to a girlfriend about, I did something that doesn't feel so right, right? And so this is a way to start going deeper than just the cravings and stop taking those at face value and start realizing we're emotional beings and food does work temporarily. But what's it working on? And it's these things that we can start answering the questions about.
Yeah, it's such a great point that you're bringing up here because people go to specific things to kind of distract them, food being one of them, phone being one of them, TV, alcohol. Like there's a lot of different things here. How can people actually figure out though if they are hungry? Is it a physical cue? Is it emotional cue? Or like what's actually happening here if they're constantly in there?
Yeah. I mean, I have something called 3 Meal Magic that I promote. It's 3 meals a day with nothing in between. I just called it 3 Meal Magic to make it sound more exciting.
Okay.
But it's like not eating in between is a big deal. Like eating 3 actual meals, so you're not skipping meals. Like it works
Yeah.
both ways. You have to eat, but you also have to stop. And so the nothing in between is a great way for people, first of all, to realize how emotional their choices are.
Mhm.
Because if you start doing 3 meals, even for like 3 days, try 3 meals over 3 days, and you'll be like, whoa, I am a snacker because this is where I'd normally be going to the kitchen looking for something, but it's not mealtime. So it cuts down on that nibbling and snacking, if not stopping it altogether. And then that is a great way to, first of all, feed yourself properly so that if you do have a craving in between meals, you can check in with yourself, and chances are it is emotional. But if you're eating all throughout the day, you don't know. You're numbed out. You don't know what's what. Whereas if you're getting properly fed, you can then notice, like I can be like, okay, like 10 a.m., I'm ready to eat. I'm like, Tricia, you had breakfast at 7. You're not starving like you're telling yourself you are. What's going on? Oh, I'm a little stressed about this presentation I have to give. You can start really connecting the dots versus, eating all day. So that's one thing. My experience is if we're eating good, nutritious food, we're getting proper nourishment, that helps decipher as well. And it's not a perfect science. Like you might not eat enough for a meal, right? One of the three meals, and then you're super hungry for the next meal. Just eat a little earlier. I always tell my clients eat put 4 or 5 hours between each meal, roughly. And that also helps with self-care because it means you don't go too late without eating,
Mhm.
and that's a trap as well. So just a healthy dose of three meals, nothing in between, 4 or 5 hours between, and then you have a better sense and you can start learning what's physical and what's emotional. But you also need to learn how to process your emotions in a healthy way. And emotional eaters don't know how to do that. So that's a whole thing. Like that's really what I'm teaching my clients is how to learn, like really how to feel, like learn how to feel, deal, and heal, so that you're not turning to food. It's like a whole new language
Yeah.
to learn to identify what you're actually feeling instead of stuffing it with food and constantly snacking.
Yeah, this is all like very important information to like check in all the time, right? I think we go through the motions so often throughout the day. Now, this is potentially a little bit different for like my audience because they lift heavy. They need to make sure that they're fueling themselves
Yes.
for pre and post workout and getting the adequate amount of protein. I know you're more on the intuitive emotional kind of side of eating. Do you do anything with like what is a proper meal? Like how does someone know if they're having a proper meal?
Yeah, so definitely, if you're burning a lot of calories, you got to eat more, and that's just the deal. And you can get help with that. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not that into intuitive eating because 3 meals a day isn't exactly intuitive eating. It's like eat, like it's
Yeah.
mealtime, eat, right? So you're not trying to. I mean, one of the problems with intuitive eating is that it leaves us it leaves us up to misinterpretation. Like I will intuit I should eat brownies, and so I have to like, and that's a joke, but the point is, people who are emotional eaters or high on the emotional eating spectrum have beat themselves up with their inability to do moderation or intuitive eating or mindful eating. Like these are all good ideas that don't work if you're an emotional eater because your cues are off. Your cues are off because you've been in diet mode for so long, you don't know what hunger is. Like you're scared by hunger. Like
Mm.
you're freaking out and eating as soon as you have a hunger pang or what might be hunger pang. So our cues are off, which is why we need kind of the guardrails of 3 meals. But if you are strength training, if you're doing that heavy work, power to you for one thing. But really, yeah, you got to eat a lot of protein. Yeah, you got to make sure you get carbs or whatever, however it is you recommend people
Yeah.
eat, but the key is that that's something you get to determine based on how many calories you're burning, what you need to feel energized. And I'm not a nutritionist, so I stay out of that lane and stay in my own lane of emotional eating.
Yeah, I brought up the intuitive eating because heal your hunger is actually one of the principles. And I've done a lot of like intuitive eating kind of research and studies and gone deep down that route. So I was just wondering, like, if you were to bring some of those principles also in your work.
Well, it works if you so what my work's really about is helping people heal their emotional burden. And emotional eaters have typically been distracting from their emotions for decades. They've
Mhm.
been overeating for decades. It's a struggle for them. They've been dieting for years. They've got diet trauma, and so my experience is creating a new relationship with food is really important. And until you've healed emotionally, so here's the thing: the compulsion to eat, meaning um that grumble in your stomach that isn't a hunger pang. It's like this building tension. It's like a spring in your stomach that need to have something that gets louder and louder to where you're like, Katie, bar the door, and you're eating brownies. That is typically not physical, it's emotional. That's where food noise comes from. And to me, it's made up of three things. The first is buried emotions. The reason why nighttime eating happens is because you've been stuffing down those emotions. That boss who, had a snippy comment to you that hurt your feelings that you just kind of blew off, right? The relationship with your girlfriend that's a little bit wonky right now, the burden of taking care of the kids. Like these are things that we're just pushing away. And so the emotions we push away, which happens daily, those are creating that's contributing to that tightening in your gut. Stress contributes to tightening in your gut, meaning you're way on overdrive, doing way too much stress, and you're not offloading the stress. Okay. So that's contributing to that tightening in your gut. And the other is habit, where when you've been reaching for something to eat for decades, you're just like, it's your North Star. You don't even think about it.
Mhm.
Even when you're trying to eat healthy, you find yourself in the kitchen. You're like, how did I get here? Because it's a habit. You've built into it a long time. So emotions, stress, and habit are those are the three things I help people deal with. Okay. Learning healthy tools for processing emotions, putting them somewhere else besides stuffing them down, so they're not hurting us. Big time addressing stress. Overeaters or overdoers. I have a thing in my book called The Anatomy of the Emotional Eater. These are 24 personality traits that contribute to overeating. Okay. It's called The Anatomy of the Emotional Eater. The top trait, Tara, is people pleasing, because we all do it. I mean, I think as women, we're prone to it more than men, right? But especially if you're an emotional eater or a food addict, you take the cake on it, pun intended. But basically because we want to get our validation, and we don't have typically good stores of validation for ourselves. So we're looking outside ourselves for it. Like, will you approve of me? Will you validate me? And if I do this extra project at work, I'm going to get kudos. If I, stay up and make the cookies for the soccer team, everybody's going to think I'm fabulous, and and then we love to hear how do you do it all? I don't know how you do it all.
Yeah.
Right? So we get the ego hit from people pleasing. Problem is that people are rarely as pleased as we plan on them being when we say yes, without checking in with our stress level. And so they're rarely as pleased as we want. So not only have we like worn ourselves out, but then we're pissed off, or at least a little aggravated. And that's the perfect storm for screw them. I'm going to reward myself with the I deserve it binge late at night after work. So that's kind of, to me, identifying the stress is really important, like pulling back from trying to be all things to all people, really important. Because if people are honest with themselves and take a look at their schedule, they're doing stuff they don't need to be doing. That's typically somebody else's to do. But we think we're so amazing and can do things better than others, or we don't want to give up control. I mean, it's a whole thing. Being a control freak is part of being an emotional eater as well. So the point is, yeah, these are things that just we have to, like, I call it honestly, Tara, this is the living problem that underlies the eating problem. And that's where we have to start taking a look, not like which diet should I be on, how much of this ingredient or that ingredient, but how am I living day to day? Am I creating so much pressure from stress and from the habit of overeating and from not being conscious of my emotions and having a new way to offload those emotions? That's what's driving us to eat.
So I know you've had a weight loss journey and, you lost 50 pounds and you're 30 years without dieting. You've maintained this is who you are. How do people like get there? How do they feel like it's not a battle anymore? And maybe what shifted for you then where you were able to really break that pattern?
Well, you can't do it alone. If you've had this habit for any length of time, my experience, you have to get coached. You need four things. One is coaching. Like you need somebody who's been in your shoes. Like, and I always say, don't hire a weight loss coach who's never been fat because it's hard there's a little mechanism in our head that says, how would you know you've never been fat? And
Mhm.
being fat sucks. Like it freaking sucks so bad. That's why I do what I do. I remember how bad it was, to be 50 pounds overweight, to have my legs chafe when I'm at the beach from the salt water. It stings from the salt water because my thighs are rubbing together. And so, and also for people to look at us differently. Like people look at us and they either say it or you can see it on their face. She has such a pretty face. If only she'd eat less and exercise more. Like
It's
as
so
if like
judgmental, though.
it's
Hopefully, we can
terrible.
get them to stop saying that.
It's terrible. And half our country is fat. It's like wake up, people. You know, we have such a fat phobic and terribly, prejudiced society. And so it's really hard. It's hard. And so my point in saying that, I mean, obviously people have, coaches of all kinds have amazing information and support to offer. But it's really important, especially when you are an emotional eater or a food addict, that you get help from somebody who's been there because there's a point at which they won't understand the problem.
Mhm.
That's why therapy, when I talk about, dealing with the underlying causes, I don't mean therapy because you can't heal this particular problem in therapy because it's not related. You can talk about your family and family origin stuff. It's not related to how you're eating. So my experience is it's a many-pronged approach. The first is getting coached, okay? One-on-one coaching, which I do obviously in my program. I have coaches in my program who are coaching one-on-one. But the second thing is community. You have to be in community with other emotional eaters because it is such a bizarre thing to be powerless over a cookie, to not be able to stop yourself. And people don't understand it. People are very well meaning when they're like, oh, eat less, exercise more. They mean well, right? They make suggestions, but they don't understand what it's like. My TEDx talk, which has close to 3 million views, I start out, Tara, by talking about eating out of the garbage, where I would binge and then I'd feel so sick that I'd throw the remains of my binge foods out. And later, when I had more room in my stomach, I would go fishing for the perfectly good cookies I threw out, and I'd eat them. And I felt like the worst person in the world, which of course I wasn't. And by my TEDx talk, there's a jillion comments of, oh my God, I thought I was the only one. So we have this sense of isolation because we usually binge in private. So there's secrecy, there's shame, around this. And so we have to be with our people. We have to be with people who know what it's like. It's a community. It's like dolphins. We all speak the same language, so the community is vital. And a lot of my program I do in community. The other thing is a very clear-cut system, like a clear system for healing. Because again, intuitive eating, mindful eating, these, moderation, these things they're general and not specific enough for somebody who really needs a healing journey. And so a clear-cut system is so helpful because if you follow all the health advice out there, like all you could eat is like ice cubes, basically, like because it all cancels each other out.
Mhm.
So my experience is when you are needing help, like, you're high on that emotional eating spectrum, being in a community and also having a system to follow is really important. And I do lay that out to some degree in my book. It's called Heal Your Hunger, 7 Simple Steps to End Emotional Eating Now. But my experience is when you're being taken by the hand and led through it, obviously it's easier. And because there's so much isolation and shame, and because, emotional eaters are dealing with, to me, the hardest of all addictive habits,
Mhm.
right? Like we think, oh, heroin, cocaine, alcohol. No, you can stop those things, by grace, you can, and help, you can stop those things, but you don't have to dabble in them. In fact, you better not, or you're screwed. Whereas food, you have to dabble with every day. You have to take your nemesis out of the fridge, deal with it, and put it back in the fridge. And so that's much harder. That's going to require more support. And people are always like, oh, I should be able to do this on my own.
Hmm.
Why? It's the hardest of all addictive habits.
Hmm.
And the fourth thing people need is consistency. Like you're never going to change if you don't get consistent with those new habits, with learning how to deal with your emotions, and you're not going to get consistent usually without support. So it's like you're not going to create new neural pathways in your brain unless you're doing these things consistently. But you won't do them consistently unless you have other people mirroring to you what it's like. You're in a huddle, several times a week saying, let's do this, right? It makes it so much easier because we all go to dinner parties where people are serving amazing foods, some of which are triggers for us. I don't like going to a party and watching people eat pie. They're all going, And I know sugar for me is a trap. So I get up and clear the dishes. But before that, I might reach out to a friend and say, I'm going to be around a whole bunch of people eating pie all night,
Hmm.
Thanksgiving, namely one of them. And so I just get support. Like I don't want to be a part of that. I'm going to get super busy doing dishes, because I don't have to sit there and act like I'm the only one. We always think we're the only one not eating pie or we're the only one not eating X. And that's actually not true. But to the emotional eater's brain, that's what we're telling ourselves, right? Our brain is telling us we're so lonely, we're left out, it's not fair. Again, so that's why we need the consistency. That's why we need the community, the coaching, the system. So those are the four things that I recommend.
Yeah. Was that also a piece of your 7-step process? I know that's like to heal your emotional eating. And really, we don't have to go through each of the steps, but like, what is maybe this program that you have in the steps? It's like, what does week 1 versus like week 12 really look like for a person?
Yeah. So it's not, those four things I gave you aren't part of my 7 simple steps. But the 7 simple steps are part of the clear system. So it's the step-by-step system. So week 1 is basically unlearning everything we thought we knew. And what I mean by that is, the diet mentality. Like it takes some time to detox from the diet mentality
Mm-hmm.
because it's been a lifelong, life of dieting and
Yeah.
and messing up and hating ourselves and thinking we suck and all that. So we have to and is this good and is that bad? It's just food. It's not good or bad. It's food.
Yeah.
Right. And so we have to really clear that away. So that's week 1 is just undoing that diet mentality that has
Hmm.
totally worked against us. And that includes exercise to compensate, right?
Yeah.
Making a new relationship with exercise. Then I do talk about the next step is clean eating, which is the 3 meal magic, 3 meals a day with nothing in between. And I give a lot of different strategies for making that happen. Like when you eat out, how to do 3 meal magic when you eat out, when you're traveling, when you're at holiday times, like all these different aspects of that to make that a reality for people. And then we go into self-care, and so I'm teaching people what I call the 6 self-care success secrets. And that's new tools, new habits people are developing. And if you want to know what they are, I'm happy to tell you. It's meditation, it's prayer, it's reading spiritual literature, it's writing, it's talking, and it's walking. Okay, so those ideally you do all 6 in a day, but that's a big list
Yeah.
when you're just starting out. So just picking 1 or 2 of them is really powerful. And my program is spiritual. So not religious, but spiritual, where I believe if people can connect with, because food has become our God. Food becomes our higher power. And so what I want people to do is start using these tools. And that's why meditation and prayer is really powerful to come home to themselves,
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
stop the spin and the busy and come home and spend time in the morning with a morning routine where you're getting still and quiet and centered. And that's where, we can start finding like our divine source that can support us and help us, and we
Yeah.
can live in grace.
And when we talk about that first week of like unlearning stuff, and then, we're getting into some of this other, what can people expect like maybe towards the end, knowing that this is a lifelong journey, just with what I teach with strength training and mobility, it's lifelong. But there is like probably a time where they like get to the end of your program or potentially working with you. That's like, what should I be expecting at this point?
Oh my gosh, like right from the beginning, people are starting to change and you can see it. Being a part of community is so critical, especially when you've been in that isolation and shame place. Um, I mean, my women, Brittany is somebody comes to mind. She's in her 30s. She's a mom. She's a music teacher, a wife, and a mama of two little ones. And she did my program and it changed everything for her. She was no longer snapping at her kids. She was kinder to her husband and she wasn't eating. I mean, when you're a music teacher to like little ones, oh my God. Can you imagine getting them all to play an instrument? So she's just calmer. She meditates, she throws off stress in healthy ways so she can be present for her kids and her spouse. So it's people are really they're really coming home to themselves. And one of the things that's really cool about what I do is I help women because one of the personality traits of the anatomy of the emotional eater is that people have trouble using their voice. So they're not saying how they really feel. They have a smile on their face and they're like, I'm fine. But the truth is they don't know how to say how they really feel. So that's something that my clients are starting to do. So it's a deeper journey. Like they're building their self-esteem. They're starting to, have a voice. They're starting to have courage to do hard things that they normally would just use food to get them, like to power them through. They're losing a lot of weight without dieting. So if you stop emotionally eating and use food for emotional reasons, when you stop that, you lose weight. Like it's just you're not overeating. And then, if you're doing good things for yourself and doing exercises, you'll just lose weight. So that's really what's happening is they're losing weight without dieting and without putting the focus on the food. Um, and then spiritually speaking, they're more connected. They're either discovering their what speaks to them as a higher source, or they're reconnecting with that source they crave, but they use food for. Like, if you think about it, we use food for comfort, we use food for stress relief, we use food when we're going through a hard time. So food like is a stand-in for a higher power. So people get reconnected when they're not using food for those things, they're going right back to, a power that can really help them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this was amazing. I know we can probably talk about this for hours longer, right? I relate so much to the binge eating as well. I came from a binge eating past and even just like you telling that story of going through the garbage, I remember, college dorm room floor, same kind of situation. Like you get back right there. So I will definitely, link the TEDx talk that you have. I know you have a podcast. Tell us where else like people can find you and learn more just about you.
Thank you. And it's so nice to be here. And thanks for sharing that about your experience. My website is healyourhunger.com, healyourhunger.com. My TEDx is on there. My podcast is on there. My podcast is called Confessions of a Binge Eater. My book is on there. And my Instagram is Tricia Nelson _ So, and I'm always doing videos about healing and inspiration and things like that.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here, Tricia. And I look forward to keeping in contact here.
Thanks. And that quiz I mentioned is on the website, healyourhunger.com, front and center.
Yeah. It's like the first thing you see. So yeah, people will
Thank
definitely
you.
have access to that in the show notes. So
Thanks,
thank you so
Tara.
much.
Yeah, good
Appreciate
to be
it.
here.